At 0523 on February 22, 1944, First Lieutenant William Carlson climbed into the left seat of B-24 Liberator Jersey Bounce Jr. at RAF Rackheath, Norfolk. The metal was cold. It was always cold. His breath came out in clouds. The cockpit smelled like oil and old sweat and fear. Every aircraft smelled like fear if you knew what to look for. His hands found the throttles in the dark. 4 of them, lined up in a row. Black knobs worn smooth by 100 hands before his. 1 for each engine. He would need all 4 today. Outside, the ground crew worked under dim blue lights. Flashlights taped over with blue paper so German bombers couldn't see them from above. England in February 1944 was a giant airfield. Thousands of bombers. Tens of thousands of men, all preparing for missions deep into Germany. The missions that killed you. Carlson was 23 years old. He had brown hair and a thin face and hands that never quite stopped shaking before a mission. This was his 14th mission. He had 11 more to go before he could go home. The numbers mattered. Every crew counted missions like prisoners count days on a cell wall. 25 missions. Then you were done. Then you lived. If you made it that far. Most didn't. The statistical life expectancy of a B-24 crew in early 1944 was 11 missions. Carlson knew the math. Everyone did. You didn't talk about it, but you knew. His co-pilot, Second Lieutenant James Hendry, climbed in through the nose hatch and squeezed past the flight engineer's station. Hendry was 22. From Michigan? He had a wife back home and a daughter he'd never met. She was born 3 weeks after he shipped overseas. He carried her picture in his flight suit pocket, right over his heart. He didn't talk about that either. The rest of the crew filed in through the waist door. 10 men total. Pilot and co-pilot up front. Flight engineer standing between them, monitoring the engines. Bombardier and navigator in the nose, crammed into a greenhouse of glass and plexiglass. Radio operator behind the cockpit. 2 waist gunners standing at open windows on either side of the fuselage. Ball turret gunner squeezed into a rotating sphere under the belly. Tail gunner alone in the back, separated from everyone, sitting in a glass cage with 2 .50 caliber machine guns and nothing but sky behind him. The tail gunner's name was Staff Sergeant Donald Pierce. He was 19 years old. He would save Carlson's life today, but neither of them knew that yet. At 0541, the engines started. One at a time. The flight engineer hit the starter for number 3. The inboard engine on the right wing. The propeller turned slowly. Once, twice. Then the engine coughed and caught with a roar that shook the entire aircraft. Blue flame shot from the exhaust stacks. Black smoke poured out and was whipped away by the wind. Then number 4, the outboard right, then number 1 and 2 on the left wing. 4 Pratt & Whitney R-1830 twin Wasp radial engines, 14 cylinders each, 1,200 horsepower each. 4,800 total horsepower, pulling 30 tons of aluminum, fuel, bombs, and men. The noise was unbelievable. You couldn't think. You couldn't hear. You just felt the vibration in your chest and your teeth and your bones. Carlson ran through the checklist. Hendry called out the items. Oil pressure. Check. Fuel flow. Check. Hydraulics. Check. Magnetos. Check. Everything worked. Everything was green. The aircraft was ready. At 0547, Jersey Bounce Jr. rolled forward. The taxiway was a river of bombers. B-24s and B-17 nose to tail, engines roaring, wingtips passing within feet of each other in the dark. They followed the blue taxi lights to the runway. One by one, the bombers ahead took off. The runway lights stretched into the distance, a corridor of dim red lights pointing east, toward Germany. At 0554, it was their turn. Carlson pushed the throttles forward. All 4 engines roared. The aircraft shook. He released the brakes. Jersey Bounce Jr. rolled forward, slowly at first, then faster. The tail came up. The runway lights blurred. 60 miles per hour, 80, 100. At 110 miles per hour, Carlson pulled back on the yoke. The nose lifted. The main gear left the ground. They were flying. Gear up, flaps up, climb power. The aircraft clawed its way into the darkness, engines screaming, wings flexing under the weight. Below them, England disappeared into the clouds. Above them, nothing but black sky and stars. The formation assembled over a radio beacon north of Rackheath. 177 bombers circled in the dark, climbing, trying not to run into each other. No lights except dim formation lights on the wingtips, just engines and darkness and the constant fear of mid-air collision. It happened more than people knew. 2 bombers would drift together in the clouds. Wingtips would touch. Both aircraft would go down. 20 men dead. Never even saw the enemy. At 06:23, the formation was complete. 3 combat wings, 59 bombers per wing, B-17S in the lead, B-24S behind. They turned east, toward Germany. At 20,000 feet, the air was thin and bitter cold, minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The windows frosted over on the inside. Carlson's oxygen mask pressed against his face, uncomfortable and tight. Every breath hissed through the rubber regulator. In, out, in, out. You had to focus on breathing at altitude. If your oxygen system failed, you had about 30 seconds before you passed out, 2 minutes before you died. It happened. Crews were found after missions, frozen solid at their stations, dead from hypoxia. They just fell asleep and never woke up. Hendry sat to Carlson's right, scanning the instruments. The flight engineer, Technical Sergeant Robert Mahoney, stood between them, eyes moving constantly between the engine gauges. Oil pressure, cylinder head temperature, manifold pressure, fuel flow, 4 engines, 16 gauges. Any one of them could kill you if you didn't pay attention. In the nose, the navigator, Second Lieutenant Frank Morrison, crouched over his maps with a pencil flashlight. He plotted checkpoints, course corrections, wind drift. His job was to get them to the target, and home again, if they made it that far. At 07:03, they crossed the English Channel. The water below was gray and endless. Waves marched in straight lines toward the French coast. If you went down in the channel, you had about 8 minutes before hypothermia killed you. The water was 42 degrees. The survival rate was almost 0. Carlson had seen crews ditch in the channel, watched them climb into life rafts, watched the rafts drift. Sometimes rescue boats got there in time. Usually, they didn't. At 07:28, they crossed into German airspace. The intercom was quiet, just the sound of men breathing through oxygen masks. The waist gunners stood at their windows, wind screaming past at 180 miles per hour, scanning the sky for fighters. The ball turret gunner rotated slowly beneath the fuselage, watching below. The tail gunner sat alone in the back, watching behind. That's where the fighters came from, always from behind. At 07:34, the tail gunner's voice cracked through the intercom. "Bandits, 6 o'clock low, coming up fast." Carlson didn't move. You didn't evade. You didn't break formation. You held your position and let the gunners do their job. The formation tightened. Bombers drew closer together, wingtips almost touching. When the fighters came, you wanted as many guns pointing at them as possible. A single B-24 had 10 50 caliber machine guns. 59 bombers meant 590 guns. That was the theory. In practice, it didn't always work. The FW-190s came in from behind and below. 8 of them, maybe 10, black crosses on the wings. They were fast, 400 miles per hour in the dive. The tail gun opened up first. 2 50 caliber machine guns hammering in short bursts. Tracer rounds arced out, red streaks against the gray sky. Then the ball turret joined in. Then the waist guns. The sound was like being inside a drum during a thunderstorm. Bang, 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 bang. Continuous, overlapping, deafening. Hot brass shell casings tumbled through the fuselage, clinking and bouncing, the air filled with the smell of gunpowder and hot oil. Carlson held the yoke steady. His job was simple. Don't move, don't flinch, let the gunners work. An FW-190 flashed past the left wing, close enough to see the pilot's head turning. 20-millimeter cannon shells walked across the sky, missing by feet. The waist gunner tracked it, firing, his gun barrel glowing red. The fighter rolled away and dove. Another came from below. The ball turret fired. Tracer rounds converged. The fighter's engine exploded. Black smoke poured out. The fighter rolled inverted and fell, spinning. No parachute. Pierce's voice from the tail. Splash 1. But there were more. A B-24 200 yards to the left took a hit. The number 3 engine disintegrated in a spray of metal and fire. The propeller tore loose and tumbled away. Smoke poured from the wing. The bomber fell out of formation, nose dipping, losing altitude. Carlson watched it drop through the formation. You always watched. You had to, because in 30 seconds, that could be you. 6 men bailed out. Their parachutes blossomed white against the gray clouds. They would be prisoners now, if they survived the fall, if the Germans didn't shoot them on the way down. Sometimes they did. The fighter attack broke off at 07:41, 7 minutes. It felt like an hour. 2 bombers were gone. Jersey Bounce Jr. was untouched, but they were still 200 miles from the target. Carlson's hands were locked on the yoke. He had to consciously relax his grip. Hendry was pale. His eyes were wide. His first combat mission had been 3 weeks ago. He was still learning, still figuring out how to be terrified and do your job at the same time. At 08:12, the flak started. Flak was worse than fighters. With fighters, you could shoot back. You could see them coming. You could do something. With flak, you just flew, through it, and hoped. The German 88mm anti-aircraft guns were brutally accurate. They fired shells on a timer. The shells climbed to a preset altitude and exploded, filling the air with jagged steel fragments moving at thousands of feet per second. A single fragment the size of your thumb could punch through an aluminum fuselage, could sever a control cable, could kill a man. The first bursts appeared as black puffs ahead of the formation, dozens of them, then hundreds. Then the concussions hit. Crump, crump, crump. The aircraft shook. Each explosion was a dull, heavy punch you felt in your chest. Shrapnel pinged off the aluminum skin like hail on a tin roof. Carlson watched the altimeter, 20,000 feet. The German gun crews had the altitude dialed in perfectly. A shell exploded 50 feet below the nose. The aircraft jumped. Another burst to the right. Black smoke. Fragments rattled against the fuselage, then one directly ahead. The windscreen starred with a sharp crack. A piece of shrapnel the size of a quarter had punched through the plexiglass. A spiderweb of cracks spread from the impact point. Cold air screamed into the cockpit through the hole. -40-degree wind at 180 miles per hour. It felt like knives. Hendry flinched. Carlson didn't. He just kept flying. There was nothing else to do. Another burst. Closer. The aircraft shuddered. Mahoney's voice was tight. Number 3 took some hits. Oil pressure's dropping. Carlson glanced at the gauge. 70 pounds. 60. 50. Feather it, Carlson said. Mahoney hit the feathering button. The propeller blades twisted, angling into the wind to reduce drag. The engine died. 3 engines now, still flyable. The B-24 could fly on 3 engines. It was designed for it. At 08:29, they reached the initial point, the IP. The moment when the formation made its final turn toward the target. From here, it was a straight run. 10 minutes. No evasive action, no turning, no dodging. Just fly straight into the flak and let the bombardier do his job. This was the worst part, the part where you were just a target. The bomb bay doors opened. The aircraft slowed. Drag increased. The remaining 3 engines roared louder, pulling harder to maintain airspeed. The flak intensified. Shells burst in clusters now, bracketing the formation. The Germans knew exactly where the bombers were going. They just put up a wall of steel and waited for the bombers to fly through it. A B, 17,300 yards ahead, took a direct hit. The entire aircraft disappeared in a black and orange fireball. Pieces tumbled out of the cloud. A wing, a tail section, bodies, no parachutes. 10 men, gone in an instant. Carlson counted 4 B-17 go down in the next 3 minutes. 40 men. Maybe some got out. Probably not. The bombardier's voice came through the intercom. Second Lieutenant Arthur Reed. He was lying in the nose, eye pressed to the Norden bomb site, hands on the controls. Steady, steady. The bomb sight was connected to the autopilot. Reed was flying the aircraft now. Tiny corrections. Left, right, steady. The target was a ball-bearing factory in Aschersleben. Ball bearings were critical. Tanks needed them. Aircraft needed them. Without ball bearings, the German war machine slowed down. That was the theory. In practice, the Germans just moved production underground. But the bombers kept coming. The whole world was flak and fire and falling bombers. 10 seconds. Carlson's hands were on the yoke, but he wasn't flying. Reed was flying. The bomb sight was flying. 5 seconds. Another B-24 exploded to the right. The wing folded up. The fuselage broke in half. Bombs away. The aircraft lurched upward as 6,000 pounds of high-explosive bombs dropped free. 12 500-pound bombs. They fell together, tumbling, fins stabilizing them. Carlson didn't wait for them to hit. He disconnected the autopilot, pushed the yoke forward, and banked left, hard. Maximum rate turn. The wings flexed. The airframe groaned. They broke away from the target, diving, picking up speed, getting out of the flak. The formation scattered. Each bomber took its own heading home. You were alone now, just your crew and your aircraft and 400 miles of enemy territory. That's when the second fighter attack came. At 08:47, 18 minutes after they left the target. Pierce's voice from the tail. Fighters, 8 o'clock high. A lot of them. Carlson looked left and up. He saw them. 12 FW-19Os. Maybe 15. They were high. 25,000 feet. 5,000 feet above Jersey Bounce Jr. They came in from the sun, diving fast, cannons firing. Orange flashes from the wings. 20-millimeter cannon shells, each one the size of a beer bottle. The first burst hit the number 4 engine, the outboard engine on the right wing. Carlson felt it immediately. A shudder ran through the airframe. The engine coughed once, twice, then died. Oil sprayed across the wing, black streaks against the aluminum. Smoke poured from the E, cowling. Mahoney's voice cracked through the intercom. Number 4 is gone. Fire in the nacelle. Carlson hit the fire extinguisher. Chemical foam dumped into the engine compartment. The fire died, but so did the engine. Feather it! Carlson shouted. Mahoney hit the button. The propeller blades twisted and locked. The aircraft yawed hard to the right. Carlson corrected with rudder. Full left rudder. The yoke fought him. 2 engines now, both on the left wing. The B-24 could barely fly on 2 engines, and they were still over Germany. The fighters came again, this time from behind. Pierce opened up with both tail guns. Tracer rounds arced out. The fighters scattered, but one came through, head on, directly at the nose. Reed saw it coming. There was nothing he could do. The fighters' cannons fired. Shells punched through the plexiglass nose. One hit Reed in the shoulder. He screamed. The navigator grabbed him, pulling him back from the bomb site. Blood sprayed across the maps. The fighter flashed overhead, missing the tail by feet. Carlson keyed the intercom. Bombardier's hit. How bad? Morrison's voice was shaking. Shoulder wound. He's bleeding bad. Can you stop it? I'm trying. Another fighter came in from the right. Cannons firing. This time they hit the number 3 engine, the inboard engine on the right wing, the same wing. The explosion was louder this time. Flames erupted from the nacelle, orange and white, streaming back along the wing. Mahoney didn't wait. He hit the fire extinguisher, dumped the whole bottle. The flames died. But the engine was gone. 2 engines on the right wing, both dead, both feathered. The aircraft yawed violently. Carlson stood on the left rudder pedal, full pressure. His legs shook from the strain. Hendry pushed the throttles forward on the 2 remaining engines, number 1 and number 2, the left wing engines. They roared at full power, maximum manifold pressure, maximum RPM. The gauges climbed into the red, but it wasn't enough. The B-24 was designed to fly on 4 engines. It could fly on 3 if you were careful. On 2, on the same wing, it was barely controllable, and they were still 350 miles from England. Mahoney's voice was tight. We're losing altitude, 500 feet per minute. Carlson looked at the altimeter. 18,000 feet, 17,500, 17,000. They were falling, slowly, but falling. Hendry looked at him. His face was white. "We need to bail out." Carlson shook his head. "Not over Germany. We won't make it to England." "We'll make it." "Bill, we've got 2 engines on one wing. We're losing 500 feet per minute. We've got a wounded man. We won't make it." Carlson's voice was quiet. "We're not bailing out." Hendry stared at him. "Tell the crew," Carlson said. "We're staying with the aircraft. We're flying home." Hendry keyed the intercom. His voice was steady. "Listen up. We're staying with the aircraft. We're flying home. Lieutenant Carlson says we can make it." Silence. Then Pierce's voice from the tail. "Then let's fly home." The radio operator, Sergeant Michael Torres, spoke next. "I'm with you, Lieutenant." One by one, the crew checked in. All of them. They were staying. If you want to hear what happened next, the impossible 4-hour flight home on 2 engines and pure will, stay with this story. Because what William Carlson did in the next 240 minutes changed how the Air Force thought about crew survival. This is World War II Chronicles, where we tell the real stories. At 09:03, Jersey Bounce Jr. was alone in the sky. The formation was gone. Every other bomber had either been shot down or flown ahead, too fast for a crippled B-24 to keep up. They were alone over Germany. 2 engines, 1 wounded man, and 350 miles to England. Carlson flew with both hands locked on the yoke and his left leg shaking from holding full rudder. The aircraft wanted to roll right, toward the dead engines, toward the ground. Every gust of wind tried to kill them. Mahoney stood between the pilots, eyes moving constantly between the engine gauges. The 2 remaining engines were running at maximum power. They had been for 20 minutes. The cylinder head temperature gauges were in the red. Manifold pressure at the stops. RPM at 2,700. The engines weren't designed to run this hard for this long. They would overheat, or the pistons would seize, or the connecting rods would break. Any one of those failures meant the engine would tear itself apart. And then they'd be down to 1 engine. You cannot fly a B-24 on 1 engine. Carlson eased the throttles back, just slightly. The temperatures dropped, but the rate of descent increased, 600 feet per minute. Now 700. The altimeter unwound like a broken clock. 14,000 feet, 13,500, 13,000. Hendry did the math in his head. At this rate, we'll be on the ground in 18 minutes. Carlson didn't answer. He was flying. That's all he could do. In the nose, Morrison had stopped the bleeding. He'd packed Reed's shoulder wound with sulfa powder and wrapped it tight with gauze from the first aid kit. Reed was conscious, in pain, but conscious. Morrison gave him a morphine syringe. Reed's voice came through the intercom, slurred but steady. "How we doing?" Carlson keyed his mic. "We're flying, Art. Just keep breathing." "I'm breathing." "Good. Keep doing that." At 09:21, they crossed into Holland. Still enemy territory, but closer to England, closer to home. Morrison called out checkpoints from his maps. Arnhem, passing 5 miles south. The ground below was a patchwork of fields and canals. Winter fields, brown and gray and empty. If they went down here, they might survive the crash. Might, but they'd be prisoners. Or worse, the Dutch resistance might hide them, or the Germans might shoot them. You never knew. At 09:34, the number 2 engine started to overheat. The cylinder head temperature gauge climbed past the red line. 420 degrees Celsius, 430, 440. Mahoney's voice was calm. "Number 2 is cooking. If the heads crack, we lose it." That would leave 1 engine, and 1 engine meant they were going down. Right now. Carlson eased the throttle back on number 2. Just a fraction. The temperature stabilized at 435, but the rate of descent increased, 800 feet per minute. The altimeter read 10,000 feet. The ground was close enough now to see individual trees, roads, buildings. At 09:47, the fuel gauges started dropping faster. Running 2 engines at full power burned fuel twice as fast as normal. Mahoney watched the gauges. did the math. His voice was quiet. At this burn rate, we'll run dry 50 miles short of England. 50 miles over the North Sea. If they ran out of fuel over the ocean, they'd ditch. Ditching a B-24 was almost always fatal. The aircraft was nose-heavy. When it hit the water, the nose went under first. The aircraft flipped forward, broke apart, sank in less than a minute. The survival rate was less than 30%. Carlson's voice was steady. "We'll make it." Hendry looked at him. "How?" "We'll make it?" At 09:59, they crossed the Dutch coast. The North Sea stretched ahead. Gray water, endless, 90 miles between Holland and England, 90 miles of open ocean. No land, no airfields, just water. And if the engines quit, that's where they'd die. Morrison plotted the course. Heading 285 degrees, straight shot to Rackheath if the engines hold. If. The altimeter read 6,000 feet. The ocean was close enough to see the waves, white caps marching in straight lines. The water was 42 degrees. If they went down, they had maybe 10 minutes before hypothermia killed them. The life rafts would deploy. Maybe, if the ditching didn't kill them first. At 10:07, the number 1 engine began to sputter. Fuel starvation. The main tanks were empty. Mahoney switched to the auxiliary tanks. The engines smoothed out. For now. But the auxiliary tanks were small. Maybe 30 minutes of fuel at this power setting. Maybe less. The altimeter read 4,000 feet. Carlson did the math. 4,000 feet. 80 miles to England. If they could just hold altitude for another 30 minutes, they'd make the coast. If. At 10:14, Pierce's voice came through the intercom. "We've got company." Carlson's stomach dropped. "Fighters?" "No. Friendlies? P-47s. 4 of them." Carlson looked left. 4 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts were forming up on their wing. Big, heavy fighters. American. The lead P-47 pulled alongside, close enough to see the pilot. He gave a thumbs up. Carlson nodded. The P-47s would escort them home. Keep the German fighters away, if any came. At 10:23, the English coast appeared. A thin gray line on the horizon. Hendry saw it first. There. Carlson saw it. He didn't say anything. He just kept flying. His arms ached. His left leg was cramping from holding full rudder for over an hour. Sweat soaked his flight suit, despite the freezing air pouring through the shattered windscreen. But they were close. So close. At 1,029, they crossed the coast at 2,500 feet, the lowest bomber to make it home that day. The P-47s waggled their wings and peeled off. Mission accomplished. Every control tower in East Anglia had been notified. Rackheath was 40 miles inland. Emergency crews were standing by, ambulances, fire trucks, crash crews. At 10:37, the number 2 engine started misfiring again. The temperature was still too high. The engine was dying. Mahoney's voice was tight. "Number 2 won't last much longer." "How long?" 10 minutes, maybe. Carlson keyed the radio. "Rackheath Tower, this is Jersey Bounce Jr. We need an immediate straight-in approach. We won't make the pattern." The tower controller's voice came back immediately. "Jersey Bounce Jr., you are cleared for straight-in approach. Runway 24. Emergency equipment is standing by. What's your status?" 2 engines, both on the left wing. No hydraulics, no brakes. Gear status unknown. 1 wounded. Low on fuel." There was a pause. "Understood, Jersey Bounce. You're cleared to land. Good luck." At 10:44, Rackheath appeared ahead. The runway was a gray strip cutting through the green English countryside. Carlson lined up. Altitude 1,500 feet. The runway was 5 miles ahead. At 10:47, the number 1 engine coughed. Sputtered. The fuel gauges read empty. Both of them. Completely empty. They were flying on fumes. Mahoney switched tanks again, opened the crossfeed valves, trying to find any fuel anywhere in the system. The engine smoothed out. But for how long? At 1,049, Carlson lowered the landing gear. Normally the gear was hydraulic. You flipped a switch and the wheels came down. But they had no hydraulics. Hendry had to lower the gear manually. There was a hand crank next to the co-pilot seat. He grabbed it and started cranking. Each turn lowered the gear a fraction of an inch. It took 42 turns to fully extend the main gear. Hendry's arms shook. His face was red. But he cranked. Finally, 3 green lights. Gear down and locked. At 10:52, they were on final approach. Altitude 800 feet. Airspeed 140 miles per hour. Too fast. But without flaps, they needed the speed to stay in the air. The flaps were hydraulic. They had no hydraulics, so they'd land fast. And hope. The runway was ahead, straight, clear. Emergency vehicles lined both sides. Fire trucks, ambulances, men standing by, watching. At 1054, the number 2 engine seized. The cylinder head cracked. The engine destroyed itself in 3 seconds. The propeller stopped. Frozen. 1 engine now. The aircraft yawed hard. Carlson stood on the rudder. Both feet. Full pressure. The nose swung left. Hendry pushed the throttle on number 1 to maximum. The last engine roared. The runway was a half-mile ahead. Altitude 200 feet. Carlson was flying on instinct now. No time to think. Just react. At 1,055 and 30 seconds, the wheels touched down. Hard. The aircraft bounced. 10 feet in the air. Touched again. This time it stayed down. Carlson cut the throttle on number 1. The last engine died. Silence. Just the rumble of wheels on concrete and the wind. No brakes. No way to stop, except drag and prayer. The aircraft rolled. 1,000 feet down the runway. 2,000 feet. 3,000 feet. The end of the runway was coming. Carlson steered with his feet, using the rudder pedals. 4,000 feet. The aircraft was slowing, but not fast enough. 5,000 feet. Slower. 6,000 feet. At 5,847 feet, Jersey Bounce Jr. stopped, 153 feet from the end of the runway. Carlson sat back. His hands were locked on the yoke. He had to consciously uncurl his fingers. Hendry was breathing hard, shaking. The intercom crackled. Pierce's voice from the tail. "We're down." Someone laughed. It sounded like crying. Torres said, "Jesus Christ." Morrison said, "We made it." Reed's voice, weak from morphine and blood loss. "I told you Bill could fly." The crew sat in silence for 30 seconds, just breathing, just being alive. Then they opened the hatches and climbed out onto the wing. The emergency crews arrived. Medics loaded Reed onto a stretcher. His shoulder was soaked with blood, but he was alive. He'd survive. The rest of the crew stood on the wing, looking at the aircraft. Mahoney walked around the engines. The number 3 engine had a hole the size of a basketball punched through the cowling. Number 4 was worse. The entire engine mount was cracked. He came back to Carlson. "Sir, you need to see this." Carlson climbed down and walked around the aircraft with Mahoney. The damage was unbelievable. Over 200 flak and bullet holes, some small, some the size of your fist. The right wing had compression damage. The skin was buckled. The tail had taken a 20mm cannon shell through the vertical stabilizer. The hydraulic lines were shredded. The control cables were frayed down to single strands. In some places, only 2 or 3 strands held. Out of 30. Mahoney pointed at the elevator control cable. "Sir, if one more strand had broken, you'd have lost pitch control." Carlson stared at it. One more strand. They had flown 400 miles on luck and 2 strands of steel cable. The fuel tanks were bone dry. The ground crew chief stuck a measuring rod into the tanks. 0, not even fumes. The engines had run until the last drop was gone. And then they'd stopped, 153 feet from the end of the runway. The wing structure was bent. The airframe was twisted. Jersey Bounce Jr. would never fly again. But the crew had made it. All of them. Later that afternoon, Carlson filed his after-action report. He wrote it in pencil at a desk in the debriefing room. His hand still shook. The intelligence officer asked him questions. Time of enemy contact, number of fighters, flak intensity. Carlson answered, but his mind was somewhere else. He kept seeing the altimeter unwinding, the fuel gauges dropping, the runway coming up. The intelligence officer asked, "Lieutenant, why didn't you bail out over Germany?" Standard procedure with 2 engines out is to abandon the aircraft." Carlson looked at him. "I had 9 men who trusted me. I wasn't going to leave them." "You could have ordered them to bail out." "I could have." "Why didn't you?" "Because we could make it." And we did. The intelligence officer made a note. Later, that note became part of a report that went up the chain. Squadron Commander, Group Commander, Wing Commander, 8th Air Force Headquarters. The report noted that Lieutenant Carlson had violated standard operating procedure by not abandoning his aircraft, but the report also noted that his decision had saved 10 lives and brought a heavily damaged bomber home. The Air Force started looking at the numbers. Crews that bailed out over Germany had a 60% capture rate. Crews that tried to fly home had a 40% loss rate, but the ones who made it brought the aircraft home, and aircraft were valuable. Crews were more valuable. The doctrine started to change. Not immediately, but slowly. Stay with the aircraft if you can. Fight to get home. Don't give up. If you're watching this and thinking about how one man's refusal to quit changed how the Air Force thought about survival, subscribe to World War II Chronicles. Because these stories matter. These men matter. And their decisions still teach us today. 3 weeks later, Carlson was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The ceremony was held at Rackheath in front of the entire group. The citation was read aloud. For extraordinary achievement while serving as pilot of a B-24 aircraft on a bombing mission deep into Germany. Despite catastrophic damage to his aircraft and the loss of 2 engines, Lieutenant Carlson displayed exceptional skill and courage in successfully returning his aircraft and crew to base, flying over 400 miles on 2 engines under combat conditions. His actions reflect great credit upon himself and the Army Air Forces. The group commander pinned the medal to Carlson's uniform. The crews applauded. Carlson stood at attention. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a pilot who'd done his job. Reed was there, arm in a sling. He'd been released from the hospital 2 days earlier. The shoulder wound would heal. He'd fly again. The whole crew was there, standing together. All 10 of them. After the ceremony, they went to the enlisted men's club and got drunk. Not falling down drunk, but drunk enough to laugh, drunk enough to forget for a few hours. Pierce raised his glass. "To Bill Carlson, the stubborn bastard who wouldn't let us bail out." They drank. Carlson raised his glass. "To the crew of Jersey Bounce Jr., who trusted me when they shouldn't have." They drank again. Torres said, "You know what the odds were of making it back on 2 engines?" Morrison said, "Don't tell me. I don't want to know." 1 in 50. Hendry laughed. "We beat the odds." Reed said, "We always do." But they didn't, not always. 2 weeks later, on March 6, 1944, Carlson flew his 15th mission. Berlin, the first American bombing raid on the German capital. Jersey Bounce Jr. was still grounded, damaged beyond repair. Carlson flew a different B-24. Tail number 4, 2-5, 216-3. No nickname, just a number. The mission was brutal. The Luftwaffe threw everything they had at the bombers. 60 American bombers were shot down that day, 600 men. Carlson made it back. So did his crew. All of them. He flew mission after mission, 16, 17, 18, each one the same. Fly into Germany, drop the bombs, fight your way home. Some missions were easy. Light flak, no fighters. Everyone made it back. Some missions were hell, heavy flak. Swarms of fighters. Bombers falling out of the sky like burning leaves. But Carlson kept flying, kept bringing his crew home. On May 1, 1944, he flew his 25th mission. Tours, France, railroad yards, light flak, no fighters. An easy mission, a milk run. He landed at Rackheath at 1340. He shut down the engines, climbed out, and walked away from the B-24 for the last time. He was done. 25 missions. He'd made it. The crew threw him a party that night. They gave him a gift, a piece of the control cable from Jersey Bounce Jr., the one that had been down to 3 strands, mounted on a wooden plaque, engraved with the date, February 22, 1944. The day they should have died, but didn't. Carlson kept that plaque for the rest of his life. He went home to the United States in June 1944. He was sent to an aircrew training base in Texas. His job was to teach new pilots how to fly the B-24, how to handle emergencies, how to make decisions when everything is going wrong. One day, a student asked him, "What do you do when you lose 2 engines over Germany?" Carlson thought for a moment. Then he said, "You fly home." "But the manual says to bail out." "The manual doesn't know your crew. You do. You make the call." "What if I make the wrong call?" "Then you learn. Or you don't, but you make the call." The student nodded. He didn't understand yet. Not really. But he would, if he survived long enough. After the war, Carlson stayed in the Air Force. He flew transport planes during the Berlin airlift, C-54 Skymasters, flying coal and food into a blockaded city. He flew during the Korean War, cargo missions, medical evacuations. He retired in 1964 as a lieutenant colonel. 20 years of service. He'd flown through 2 wars and never got shot down, never lost a crew member, never quit. He moved to Florida, bought a small house near St. Augustine. He didn't talk much about the war. Most veterans didn't. They'd lived it once. That was enough. But sometimes, when the crew got together for reunions, they'd tell the story. The story of February 22, 1944. The day they flew home on 2 engines and raw will. Pierce would start. "Remember when Bill said we weren't bailing out?" Torres would laugh. "I thought he was crazy." Morrison would shake his head. We all did. Reed would hold up his glass. But he was right. Carlson would sit quietly, listening, smiling. In 1988, Carlson had a heart attack. He was 67 years old. He survived the first one. The second one, 3 weeks later, killed him. He died on August 14, 1988, at home, in his sleep. His wife found him in the morning. The funeral was held at a small church in St. Augustine. 6 of the 10 crew members from Jersey Bounce Jr. were there. Pierce, Torres, Morrison, Reed, Mahoney, Hendry. 4 had died in the years since the war: old age, cancer, car accidents, life. Pierce gave the eulogy. He was 64 years old now. His hair was white, his hands shook, but his voice was strong. He said, "Bill Carlson saved our lives on February 22, 1944. Not because he was the best pilot in the Air Force, not because he was lucky, but because when everyone else would have jumped, he stayed, and he flew us home." He paused, looked down at his notes. Then he looked up. "I was 19 years old when I met Bill Carlson. I was terrified every single mission. I thought I was going to die. We all did. But Bill never quit. Not once. And because he didn't quit, I'm standing here today, 64 years old, married, 3 kids, 5 grandkids. I got to live my life because Bill Carlson refused to give up." He stopped. His voice cracked. The world needs more men like Bill Carlson. They buried him at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu. Plot C-1140, a white headstone, William L. Carlson, 1st Lieutenant U.S. Army Air Forces, World War II, 1921 to 1988. The headstone doesn't mention the Distinguished Flying Cross. It doesn't mention the 25 missions. It doesn't mention February 22, 1944. But the men who were there remember. And now you know the story too. The story of a pilot who refused to quit, who flew 400 miles on 2 engines, who brought 9 men home when everyone said it was impossible. That flight took 4 hours and 17 minutes. From 0847, when the second engine died, to 1104, when the wheels touched down. 257 minutes. It should have been impossible. The aircraft should have fallen. The engines should have failed. The fuel should have run out. But Carlson kept flying, foot by foot, mile by mile, because he made a promise. Not to the Air Force, not to the mission, to 9 men who trusted him. And he kept it. Every single story we tell on World War II Chronicles is like this. Real men, real events, real courage. Not Hollywood, not exaggerated, just the truth. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories that deserve to be remembered, subscribe to World War II Chronicles. Because men like William Carlson should never be forgotten. And the decisions they made still matter today. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. And join us as we bring these stories back to life. One mission at a time. One story at a time. One act of courage at a time. This is World War II Chronicles, where history lives.